Spring 1874. A company of Texas Rangers rides into a supply depot and does something the state of Texas did not ask them to do. They turn in their government-issue Sharps carbines, chambered in .50 caliber, 70 grain. The Sharps was single-shot, reliable, and standard issue for a reason. It had served frontier units for years without complaint. They do not turn in the Sharps because the Sharps failed them. They turn it in because a company in New Haven, Connecticut is now selling something better, and no one in Austin is going to pay for it. So the Rangers pay for it themselves. Out of wages that barely cover a horse and a bunk, men who earn almost nothing hand over their own money for a rifle the state never authorized. Each man buys his own Winchester Model 1873, chambered for a new round called the 4440. It is not standard issue, it will never be standard issue, and within a decade it is the rifle every Ranger company in Texas carries anyway, purchased the same way, out of pocket, company by company, until the unauthorized rifle becomes the unofficial standard. That rifle was not built for soldiers. It came from a man who had already gone bankrupt once building something else 14 years earlier. Oliver Winchester was born outside Boston in 1810 into a farming family with almost no money and less formal schooling. He worked construction in Baltimore as a young man, then moved into dry goods, then into shirt making, where he actually made his fortune selling shirts, not guns. By the 1850s, he was a wealthy Connecticut businessman looking for his next investment, and in 1855, he found one, a small arms venture called the Volcanic Repeating Arms Company, founded that year by Horace Smith, Daniel Wesson, and a New York partner named Palmer. This was the same Smith & Wesson who would later found the famous revolver company. The idea behind Volcanic did not start with them either. Years earlier, an inventor named Walter Hunt had designed something he called the volition repeating rifle, firing a strange self-contained round known as the rocket ball. The rocket ball was unusual in its own right, a bullet with the propellant charge packed into a cavity in its base, doing away with a separate cartridge case entirely. A gunsmith named Lewis Jennings improved the mechanism, and a small firm called Robbins and Lawrence built a limited number of them. Smith & Wesson bought the rights, refined the design further, and folded it into the company that became Volcanic, betting that a self-contained round was the future of the repeating rifle, even if their first version of it wasn't quite there yet. Volcanic's idea was sound. Its execution was not. The rifle itself was mechanically weak, prone to jamming, and underpowered in the field. By 1856, the company had gone under. Winchester, one of its investors, bought up the bankrupt firm's assets, its patents, its parts inventory, and its lease, and in 1857 opened a new operation under a new name, the New Haven Arms Company, in New Haven, Connecticut. He kept on Volcanic's factory superintendent, a gifted mechanic named Benjamin Tyler Henry. Henry took the old Volcanic idea apart and rebuilt it from the ground up. He reworked the ammunition into a new .44 caliber rimfire round and built a rifle around it, a lever-action breech-loading repeater that could fire far faster than anything else a soldier might carry. It went into limited production in 1860 under his own name, the Henry rifle. In over a 6-year production run, the New Haven Arms Company built roughly 12,000 of them. The United States government eventually ordered over 1,700, and many were issued to troopers of the 1st Maine and 1st District of Columbia cavalry regiments, while thousands more were bought privately by Union soldiers who wanted an edge the Army wouldn't issue them. One odd Confederate soldier described it as the rifle you could load on Sunday and shoot all week. In 1866, with the company on stronger footing, Oliver Winchester reorganized it one final time. New Haven Arms became the Winchester Repeating Arms Company. Its first release under the new name was a redesigned, improved version of the Henry, the Model 1866, nicknamed the Yellow Boy for its brass receiver. That same year, Winchester briefly stepped away from day-to-day business to serve as Lieutenant Governor of Connecticut. and later in life he became one of the era's notable philanthropists, giving heavily to Yale University in the city where his factory stood. Oliver Winchester died in December of 1880 at the age of 70. He did not live to see the company's most productive years, but by then, its direction was already set, and the business he had built out of a bankrupt rifle company and a shirtmaker's fortune was only beginning its climb. The Yellow Boy sold. It sold well, but it still carried two of the Henry's original weaknesses forward with it, and Oliver Winchester knew both of them had to go. The first weakness was the loading system. The Henry design loaded from the muzzle end of the magazine tube through a barrel sleeve that had to be rotated open, cartridges dropped in base first, spring tension pushing them back into the receiver. It worked. It was also slow, awkward, under pressure, and the tube itself was fragile. A company employee named Nelson King fixed this with a simple side loading gate, which solved the mechanical problem but not the deeper one underneath it. That deeper problem was the cartridge. The Henry's .44 caliber rimfire round was a Civil War era compromise, built around a soft copper case that split on firing more often than any user wanted, and it lacked the raw power that men living and working outside a city increasingly needed. Ranchers driving cattle through hostile territory needed something that would stop an animal or a threat in one shot. Lawmen serving warrants alone, with no backup for miles, needed a rifle that would not fail them at the one moment it mattered. Hunters, depending on a single shot doing real damage at real distance, needed more than a soft rimfire round could give them. For all of them, the existing options were a trade-off. The single-shot rifles hit harder, but reloaded slowly, one cartridge at a time, hand to breech, while the Yellow Boy reloaded fast, but hit soft. A rancher facing a wounded animal or a lawman facing more than one armed man at once did not have the luxury of choosing between speed and stopping power. They needed both in the same weapon, and in 1873, nothing on the market gave it to them. Nobody on the frontier could afford to carry two different rifles for two different problems. By 1873, Winchester's engineers had settled on the fix: a stronger frame and an entirely new round. The Winchester Model 1873 kept the general profile of the Henry and the Yellow Boy, but almost everything under the skin changed. The old brass receiver was replaced with a much stronger iron frame, later switched to steel. A standard rifle held 15 rounds in its tubular magazine. The rifle configuration ran a 24-inch barrel and a distinctive crescent-shaped buttstock, while the carbine version carried a shorter 20-inch barrel and a longer 30-inch musket variant was also offered. Buyers could further customize barrel length, stock finish, and trigger work, turning the base rifle into dozens of different configurations depending on what a customer needed it for. And it introduced the 4440 Winchester central fire cartridge, a .44 caliber 200-grain bullet driven by 40 grains of black powder, leaving the muzzle at roughly 1,200 feet per second. It was Winchester's first centerfire cartridge, and it was matched to the rifle with a precision that immediately set it apart from anything the company had built before. The round proved so popular that within a year, Winchester added a second chambering, the 3840, and by 1882 had introduced both a 32-20 and a 22 rimfire option, expanding the same rifle across an entire family of calibers. Oliver Winchester's own son, William Wirt Winchester, even designed an all-in-one reloading tool so customers could load their own .44-40 ammunition at home, cutting the cost of staying armed on the frontier. But the round's real advantage wasn't ballistic, it was strategic. Colt and Remington both began chambering their revolvers for the same .44-40 round, which meant a man carrying a Winchester rifle and a Colt revolver only had to carry one kind of ammunition for both. That single shared cartridge turned two separate weapons into one supply chain, and the pairing became especially popular out west, where a resupply of ammunition might be weeks away, and carrying two calibers instead of one was not a risk most people could afford to take. It is what made the rifle nearly impossible for a competitor to dislodge once it took hold, and it is a large part of why Winchester itself would later market the Model 1873 with the hyperbolic tagline that has followed it ever since: the gun that won the West. That decision is what put the Model 1873 into the hands of institutions, not just individuals. By the mid-1870s, Texas Ranger companies were carrying the 1873 as a matter of course, the men themselves absorbing the cost the state wouldn't, trading in the same government issue Sharps carbines company after company. Buffalo Bill Cody carried Winchester repeaters through his years as a frontier scout and hunter, and later built them into his traveling Wild West show, putting the rifle in front of audiences who had never been west of the Mississippi and turning it into a piece of American mythology before most of them ever touched one. Theodore Roosevelt relied on Winchesters for years before he became famous for anything else. During his ranching years in the Dakota Badlands, he used a Model 1876 and a Model 1886, and he later wrote plainly about his own preference. Personally, I have always preferred the Winchester. A frontier scout and regulator named Tom Horn carried a Model 1894 in .30-30 caliber during his final years working the open range. Pat Garrett carried one. Butch Cassidy carried one. Belle Starr carried one. Outlaws and lawmen on opposite sides of the same conflicts carried the same rifle. For the same reason, it was the fastest, most dependable repeater a person could put their own money into. The institutional trust only deepened as Winchester kept refining the design. The Model 1895 broke from the old tubular magazine entirely in favor of a box magazine, better suited to the newer, more powerful, smokeless cartridges of the day, and it became one of the most respected hunting rifles ever built. Theodore Roosevelt called it his medicine gun for lions. The novelist Zane Grey, who used one for years, called it the finest rifle ever built. Buffalo Bill Cody thought highly enough of the Model 1895 that he gave them away as personal gifts to friends. In 1909, Roosevelt carried one chambered in .405 Winchester centerfire on his African safari, hunting lions and buffalo with the same company's rifle he'd trusted on the American frontier decades earlier. And in Arizona, the endorsement became formal policy rather than personal preference. When the Arizona Rangers were organized at the turn of the century, their first captain, Burton C. Mossman, specifically required that every Ranger carry the latest Model 1895 Winchester smokeless powder carbine, chambered in .30-40 Krag, the same round the United States Army itself was adopting. That was not one lawman making a personal choice. That was a state law enforcement agency writing a specific Winchester model into its own equipment standard, and running underneath all of it, from the Rangers to Roosevelt to the outlaws they chased. The same original round kept doing the same work. The .44-40 was the thread connecting a Ranger's saddle scabbard to a rustler's rifle to the revolver on a lawman's hip. Trust in the cartridge became trust in the company that made it. And by the late 1870s, that trust had turned into numbers no competitor could match. Even later Winchester models kept returning to it. The compact Model 1892, a smaller and faster lever action built for close work, was itself offered in the same .44-40 chambering more than 15 years after the round was first introduced. Trust in the cartridge became trust in the company that made it, and by the late 1870s, that trust had turned into production numbers no competitor could match. The Model 1873 remained in production for 47 consecutive years, and by the time it was finally discontinued, the company had built over 720,610 of them. It was last listed in Winchester's catalog in 1920, but enough finished rifles remained in warehouse inventory that dealers kept selling them off their shelves until 1924, 4 years after the company had officially stopped building new ones. That kind of dominance draws talent, and in 1883, it drew the man who would define Winchester's next 2 decades. John Moses Browning was a young gunsmith working out of a small shop in Ogden, Utah, when a Winchester vice president named Bennett saw one of his single-shot rifle designs and immediately understood what he was looking at. Bennett boarded a westbound train that same day, traveled to Ogden, and sat down with Browning and his brother Matt in their small gun shop. The negotiation was brief. Bennett bought the manufacturing rights on the spot for $8,000, and it began a 19-year working relationship that would define Winchester's entire product line. From 1883 to 1902, nearly every new rifle and shotgun the company released carried a Browning design underneath it. The Model 1885 was a rugged single-shot design, still manufactured today in various calibers. The Model 1892 was a compact lever action built for pistol-caliber cartridges, small and fast in the hand. The Model 1894 was chambered for a new round called the .30-30 and went on to become one of the best-selling hunting rifles in American history. The Model 1895 was the box magazine rifle that carried Roosevelt through Africa, and the Model 1897 pump shotgun rounded out a lineup so dominant that 5 separate Browning designs became genuine bestsellers for the company. Winchester's name by this point had become shorthand for the category itself. People no longer said they were carrying a lever-action rifle. They said they were carrying a Winchester. Competitors existed. Marlin built lever actions of its own, and other makers chased the same market. None of them managed to put a single name on the entire category the way Winchester had, and for nearly 2 decades, one gunsmith working out of a small Utah shop was the reason why. But nearly the entire design pipeline ran through one man, and in January of 1902, Bennett was about to refuse that man something. Browning had developed a new auto-loading shotgun, an entirely self-loading design unlike anything Winchester had sold before, and he wanted a royalty on every unit sold, rather than the flat buyout Winchester had always preferred. Bennett said no. After 19 years and 5 best-selling designs, Browning walked out of the relationship for good. He first took the design east to Remington. An appointment was set for January 8, 1902, with Remington's president, Marcellus Hartley. Browning arrived early and sat in the waiting room while word was sent that Hartley would be along shortly. Before the meeting could happen, Hartley suffered a fatal heart attack in the building that afternoon. The deal, and the company's chance to secure the design, died with him. Weeks later, Browning boarded a ship to Belgium and offered the same shotgun to Fabrique Nationale in Liège. The Belgian company accepted his royalty terms almost immediately, and on March 24, 1902, signed him to an exclusive worldwide contract. The gun became the Auto 5. Browning was confident enough in the design to personally order 10,000 units for the American market, and every one of them sold within a year. Fabrique Nationale would go on to produce the Auto 5 continuously for nearly a century, and the deal put the Belgian company on the map as a serious international arms maker. Every future Browning-designed firearm, decades of them, would now belong to companies other than Winchester. Without Browning in the drafting room, Winchester tried to build its way back into the self-loading shotgun market on its own. The result was the Model 1911 SL, an auto-loading shotgun the company rushed out to compete with the Auto 5 it no longer had the rights to sell. The design required the shooter to grip and pull down on the barrel itself to work the action, an awkward and dangerous arrangement compared to Browning's original, and the gun quickly earned a grim nickname on the market as the Widowmaker. It was in effect a doomed attempt to substitute engineering for the one designer the company had let walk out the door. That was the first crack. The second came from outside the company entirely, as armies around the world standardized on bolt-action military rifles. Through the turn of the century, the lever action was pushed out of serious government contract work, cutting Winchester off from a scale of military business that had helped fuel its earlier growth. The third crack was the deepest. To meet demand during the First World War, Winchester borrowed heavily and expanded its production capacity dramatically, building out factory space and hiring workers on the assumption that wartime output would keep paying for itself. The war ended. The debt did not. Through the early 1920s, the company tried offsetting the shortfall by manufacturing kitchen knives, roller skates, and refrigerators alongside its firearms, using its surplus factory capacity to chase any revenue it could find in the consumer market. It wasn't enough. By the mid-1920s, the company was visibly failing, and when the Great Depression hit, Winchester Repeating Arms went into receivership in 1931. The rifle itself hadn't failed. The 4440 and its descendants were still selling wherever they were offered. What failed was a company that let its own peak-era success, one designer walking away, one contract boom built on borrowed money, become the thing that ultimately broke it. On December 22, 1931, the Western Cartridge Company, owned by the Olin family, bought Winchester Repeating Arms at bankruptcy auction and merged it into a new entity, Winchester Western. John Olin's plan was to restore the name to what it had been, and the Second World War gave him the chance almost immediately. Winchester became a wartime manufacturer of the M1 carbine and the M1 Garand rifle, supplying the United States military at a scale the company had not seen since the debt-fueled expansion that had nearly killed it a generation earlier. The recovery did not hold indefinitely. In the years after the war, the Olin Winchester Western Division tried twice to diversify beyond firearms, and both attempts failed. The first was an experimental indoor shooting range concept called Wingo, built in San Diego, California, combining exclusive guns, ammunition, and target launching machines under one roof. It never found a profitable footing in a western city full of competing outdoor activities. The second was an attempt to compete directly with the Coleman Company in camping equipment under the name Trailblazer by Winchester, selling propane stoves, lanterns, tents, and sleeping bags. Neither venture lasted. Rising labor costs through the 1960s and the 1970s made the old hand, finished rifle designs increasingly expensive to produce next to competitors using cheaper cast and stamped manufacturing methods, and a prolonged strike in 1979 and 1980 convinced Olin that firearms could no longer be made profitably in New Haven. In 1980, Olin sold the plant to its own employees, who reincorporated as the United States Repeating Arms Company under license to keep building Winchester-branded guns, while Olin kept the separate and more profitable ammunition business for itself. That new company went bankrupt in 1989. The rights to the Winchester Firearms name passed through a French holding company and eventually to a Belgian arms group, the Herstal Group, which also owned Fabrique Nationale and Browning, the very company descended from the designer Winchester had lost in 1902. On January 16, 2006, the operators announced the New Haven plant would close for good. Effective that March, the factory stopped manufacturing the Model 70, the Model 94, and the Model 1300, ending production on a site that had made Winchester rifles and shotguns for 140 consecutive years. The name didn't die with the factory. Manufacturers in the United States and Belgium, under the Fabrique Nationale and Browning umbrella, still produce Winchester-branded firearms today, including new production of the Model 1873 itself, the same rifle the Texas Rangers once bought out of their own pockets. The design is still used today by competitors in modern cowboy action shooting events, men and women in period costume racing the same lever action against a stopwatch instead of an outlaw. And in the collector market, the value of the originals has only grown. In 2016, a Model 1886 Winchester, serial number 1, presented to the Army captain who accepted the surrender of Apache leader Geronimo, sold at auction for $1.265 million, at the time the highest price ever paid for a single firearm. That record held for a decade. Then in June of 2026, an auction house in Texas sold a rifle with an even more direct claim to the company's origins. Henry Rifle, serial number 1, the very first weapon ever built under the company that would become Winchester. It had originally been presented more than a century and a half earlier by the New Haven Arms Company itself to Abraham Lincoln's Secretary of War. It sold in 2026 for $5,875,000, a new world record for any rifle ever sold at auction, and a hammer price that matched the sale of the Colt revolver that killed Billy the Kid. The first gun the company ever built, and the rifle it built its name on a decade later, had turned out to be the same unbroken line. The auction house behind that sale, based in Bedford, Texas, has built its own reputation largely on rifles like this one. In a single prior year, it moved more than $51 million in historic firearms, and Winchester rifles remain some of the most consistently valuable pieces that cross its stage, alongside Colt revolvers, as the two names collectors return to again and again when they talk about what actually built the American frontier. The factory floor where the 1873 was hand-assembled is gone. But one detail about it isn't widely known outside the auction room. For most of a century, the Winchester plant was the largest employer in the new Hallville neighborhood of New Haven, the beating heart of an entire working-class district built around its gates. That changed in 1965 when the company shifted its main production line elsewhere, and the neighborhood's industrial identity began fading well before the final closure 4 decades later. Today, the Winchester Avenue plant itself hasn't been torn down, and it isn't a museum either. It was converted into apartments. People sleep today ordinarily in the same rooms where the rifle that won the West was built by hand, one action at a time, for 140 years. Spring 1874, again. A company of Texas Rangers turns in their government-issue Sharps carbines and pays out of their own wages for something new. They aren't buying a company's flagship product. They don't know that yet, and it wouldn't matter to them if they did. What they're actually buying is a cartridge, the .44-40. It was never the most powerful round on the market, and the rifle it came in was never the only lever action a person could buy. What it had that the others didn't was a company willing to build the ammunition, the revolver chambering, and the rifle around one shared idea, and stand behind that idea through a designer walking out the door, a world war's worth of debt, a bankruptcy, a second bankruptcy, and the closing of the factory floor where it all began. That round will outlive the men who chose it, outlive the factory that built it, outlast every one of those failures, and end up, a century and a half later, inside a gun that sells for millions of dollars to someone who never fired a shot in anger in his life.